today from our Charles Darwin Reserve in the Midwest of WA. And this is the traditional country of the Badimia people of the Yamatji Nation. So I'd like to acknowledge their continuing connection to country and culture and pay my respects to their elders, past and present, and extend that respect to all other Indigenous Australians online with us today. For thousands of years, the Badimia people have travelled the very complex terrain of this landscape, finding food, clothing, shelter, and looking after country as the original custodians. So we acknowledge that their creation serpent, the Bimara, created all the waterholes and hills moving through this wonderful country and still lives with us today. Please join me in taking a moment to recognise the incredible privilege we have to be standing on this beautiful country. You can see behind us some wonderful York gums in the background that have been looked after and stewarded by first Australians for tens of thousands of years. So, as usual with our webinars, you can use the chat function at the bottom right of your screen. So you can say good day and let us know where you're calling from. And please feel free to post any questions that you may have so that we can get to those in the Q&A section. Now, what a treat we've got today. We're coming to you live from Charles Darwin Reserve. And as I mentioned, we're about 220 kilometres southeast of Geraldton, and it's a vast landscape. At the right time of year, you've got this wonderful sweep of beautiful flowers, which this part of the world is famous for, and some of you may have visited, but also salt lakes. And as I traversed a salt lake yesterday, I was surprised to find it completely full of water because we've had a lot of rain in the country recently. So it's a beautiful landscape, woodlands, granite outcrops, all representing a powerful opportunity to make a difference to nature. Bush Heritage and the traditional custodians and a lot of local, state and private conservation groups have been working to protect refuges for plants and animals in this region. And to date, we've managed to secure a connected area of nearly 1 million hectares, which is pretty fantastic. But until now, a crucial piece of the jigsaw, and we'll see a map in a minute, crucial piece has been missing, and that's called Wanarra. And that's what we're going to talk about today. The reserve management team have had Wanarra on our radar for almost 20 years, I think. Isn't that right, Shelley? I know we haven't had a chance to introduce you yet, but it's been a long time, hasn't it? And now we finally have the opportunity to purchase and protect this extraordinary 107,000 hectare property, which adjoins Charles Darwin. So we go to great lengths to determine the most suitable properties. As you know, it's a very important process of prioritisation, and it fits into our target of managing and protecting 2.4 million hectares by 2030. So we're always on the lookout for these properties with high conservation values that will make a big difference. So let's get on and find out what is so good about Wanarra. And to do that, I've got the wonderful Shelley here with me out on Charles Darwin. Welcome, Shelley. And I've got the wonderful Fiamma Riviera, who's at home back in Geraldton because she has the challenge of moving house today as well as doing this webinar. So thank you, Fiamma, for joining us despite that challenge. Perhaps you guys can just introduce yourself to the listeners. Shelley, how about you?
Yeah, sure. Hello, everybody. My name's Shelley. I'm the Healthy Landscape Manager for the Midwest region of WA for Bush Heritage. And so I work with the team to manage and protect the 3 reserves in the Midwest area, which are Charles Darwin, where we are today, Uradi and Hamlin reserves. So yeah, I've been with Bush Heritage for about 1.5 years now and grew up in the Midwest, so definitely feel very connected and feel like this is a very special part of the world.
And Fiamma, how about you? What's your role?
Hello, everyone. I'm a restoration ecologist, as you've already said, Matthew, based here in Geraldton in the Midwest. And similarly to Shelley, I work across the 3 current reserves, hopefully 4 very soon.
Mm-hmm.
And my passion is botany, so I've worked in my previous life as a consultant botanist, and I've also worked in academia as a restoration ecologist. So, you know, working in the Midwest with all these plants in particular is absolutely amazing, but have been loving for the last 3.5 years, learning so much from all my colleagues as well about all aspects of our amazing Midwest region.
Wonderful. Well, this opportunity we have ahead of us to acquire Wanarra and expand our work beyond the boundaries of Charles Darwin. Let's start by getting a sense of what this landscape is that you've referred to and why it's wonderful. Perhaps, Fiamma, you can tell us a bit about the region and why it's so special down here in the Midwest.
Certainly. When we purchased Charles Darwin Reserve in 2003, there were some sort of key things that stood out. So it had been a sheep and goat pastoral station, so it certainly wasn't in perfect condition, but it had some amazing combination of factors. So first and foremost, it straddles two really key regions. So the southern half, and this is very similar for Wanarra, is in the southwest biodiversity hotspot. So one of the world's 35 biodiversity hotspots, and these are areas that have extremely high species diversity, and often those species are found nowhere else, so also very high endemism. But the other flip side of what makes a biodiversity hotspot is that they are under threat. And that is certainly the extent of the Southwest biodiversity hotspot. It stretches from just north of Kalbarri, sort of down to Esperance, which broadly aligns with the agricultural regions of Western Australia. So about 90% of that has been cleared and only 4% is under formal protection. So the southern half of CDR and Wanarra are very important in that they have large remnants of what would have once been very widespread, in particular sandplain shrublands and woodlands. But the northern half of CDR and Wanarra are in the arid Aramaean rangelands. So there's quite a sharp line through these properties, and you get this marked change in ecosystems and species. And so this means that both CDR and Wanarra and the landscape more broadly has a high and really unique combination of both animal species. We're sort of nudging up to about 300 of what we found on CDR so far, as well as plant species. And we're sort of heading to 700 for what we found on CDR. And so goodness knows what we're also going to find on Wanarra, hopefully, if we are so lucky as to purchase it. I think that's gives you an idea of what an awesome conservation opportunity Wanarra really is.
Yes, thanks, Fiamma. And Shelley, maybe you can tell us, many of our recent property acquisitions have been about putting a puzzle together and connecting landscapes up. Wanarra's no different, really. It's a perfect piece of the jigsaw, isn't it? So can you tell us a little bit more about how important that is and how it fits in?
Yeah, sure, Matthew. Yeah, connectivity is absolutely key when we're dealing with such vast and fragmented landscapes like we're dealing with here. So Wanarra Station, as Fiamma was showing there into those maps, it's immediately to the west of Charles Darwin, and we share about 50 kilometres of border with Wanarra. So it's on the lands of both the Widi mob and the Badimia people of the Yamatji Nation. It's got some really incredible features, including and this is important both culturally and ecologically. So a great example is the Mungas Lake complex that we have, which you can kind of see hugging the western side of Wanarra, and then it kind of cuts through Wanarra and heads across to the east. But it's a huge system, and it's got really important cultural heritage. It's a really important cultural heritage site both for Widi mob and Badimia. So that's a great example. But like Fiamma was saying, there's some really, really incredible vegetation types across Wanarra that can be seen in varying amounts on Charles Darwin as well. And yeah, that puzzle piece, I think it really is a good example of that at Wanarra, because you've got so many areas of land that are protected around Wanarra and Charles Darwin. So you've got to the east of Charles Darwin, you've got Australian Wildlife Conservancy Mount Gibson. And then to the north of Wanarra, so if you go around the other side, you've got Lakada, Carrara, Warradia, So it's really quite a hub for conservation and protected land. So all of those areas together would end up, including Wanarra, would end up being about 1 million hectares of protected land. Yeah, it's a similar size, a little bit bigger than Charles Darwin Reserve. So it's 107,000 hectares, and so altogether, if they were managed as one piece, it would be 175,000 hectares, which is just massive. And like Fiamma was saying, it spans this transition zone between the semi-arid rangelands and the wheat belt. So it's really, really interesting from an ecological perspective as well. The history the pastoral history there is mostly grazing sheep and goats. And the current owner, Richard Hamilton, destocked the property about 13 years ago.
Right.
So yeah, there's a lot of work to kind of restore and recover some of that grazing pressure from previous years as well.
That's given us a head start, really, hasn't it?
Yeah,
it's like 13 years of conservation head start.
It has.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
How amazing. Well, it'd be lovely to know whether you guys have personal favorites. What is it about Wanarra that you find really special or exciting? Because I know that's different for everybody. Fiamma, what about you, being a vegetation person? Is it the plants or is it something else?
Can I be greedy? Give a two-part answer.
Go for it.
I know
Go for it.
very little about insects, and so it's proper childlike wonder when we then have the insects experts out, like we did at CDR many years ago, and they show you all these wonderful bugs and creatures and spiders that they find. I'm very excited about that. It's definitely not my field of expertise, so I come to it with complete childlike wonder. So I'm really looking forward to that. But as a veg person, I'm really intrigued by the banded ironstone formations. That's my background here. That's a banded ironstone formation on Wanarra. Geologically really ancient landscapes, very ancient, and they often have their own little unique assemblages of flora and fauna, so much so that it can be different from one banded ironstone hill to another one. So I can't wait to get out there and just have a poke around, see what we can find.
Excellent. And Shelley, what about you that excites you about the new place?
Oh, there are so many things. I think like Fiamma said, there's so many things to discover and probably rediscover as well out there. I think just the sheer scale of Wanarra being so large, but then also being connected to all those other areas, I think there's just so much scope and potential for, being able to kind of conserve and do landscape scale land management, but at a real scale where you're working together with a bunch of other landholders. So yeah, really excited to see what we can do at that scale.
Wonderful. Now you mentioned, Fiamma, that you've got the banded ironstone country, and there are quite a few different vegetation types, aren't there, across CDR and Wanarra? And I experienced some of those as I drove in yesterday from Geraldton. Perhaps you can tell us a bit more about these different geological and landscape and vegetation types. And also, are there any special threatened species? Because we always like to hear about threatened species.
Certainly. So we've got various types of rocky outcrops, so not just the banded ironstones. We've got some huge granite outcrops as well, and they often have a particular assemblage of plants. They're also culturally very important as places of water often. And also some quartz outcropping, which is pretty specky. So yeah, lots of different outcropping. Obviously, the magnificent Munger's Lake complex. And instead, people just think often as a salt pan, and it's either full or empty, but it's all the fringing vegetation associations. Those can be very varied, from sort of salty woodlands to Melaleuca groves to samphire flats. So there's lots of diversity within that big lake complex. We obviously have the woodlands, so these magnificent stands of York gums, salmon gums, and gimlet woodlands, probably some others out there. Some of the last big stands left in the state that are not under protection. So that's very exciting. And those woodlands are really important for hollow-dependent species. they live for a very long time, and they provide lots of great habitat. We also have lots of different types of shrublands. So whether that's the arid range shrublands, which have a very high diversity of wattles in particular, or whether it's the shrublands on the sandplain in the Southwest Biodiversity Hotspot, which have a very high floral diversity, but are also key habitat for the malleefowl. So malleefowls are a key threatened species, and those shrublands are a stronghold for them. They certainly are on CDR, so we're expecting that they would be on Wanarra as well. But yes, hopefully I'm going off what we've found on CDR, hoping to find some shieldback trapdoor spiders. Some of them are endangered, some species of them are endangered as well. And obviously threatened flora, I'm sure we'll find some as well. There's a long list of that as well.
Excellent. Well, it does sound very exciting. And we've mentioned the wildflowers a couple of times. This whole region is famous for its wildflowers, isn't it? And the last time I visited CDR was during wildflower season. So I think we can't go past mentioning them a little bit. Can you talk to us a bit about what makes up these amazing assemblages of wildflowers in, come September, October?
Yep. Sorry, very remiss of me not to put them at the top of the list, really. They are magnificent. People come from around the world. People have it on their, life's bucket list to come and see the wildflowers of the Midwest. So huge expanses of daisies. That is predominantly what those huge carpets are. But there are some other sort of lesser sort of known species like paracaleas and fanflowers. But overwhelmingly, they're annual flowers. So they come up in winter, flower in spring, dry off, set seed, die, and the next phase comes up again. All colours of the rainbow, absolutely magnificent, and provide a really important food source for lots of insects as well as some birds. So they provide this huge flush of resources into the system each year, although that does depend a little bit on rain as to the extent of the display. But yes, definitely a sight to behold.
Yes, so I'd certainly encourage anybody who hasn't visited the southwest of WA to consider putting it on their bucket list, as I did many years ago. And you can actually follow the spring, can't you, down from around about here and follow it right down into the southwest and finish up in Albany and watch the wave of spring opening up, can't you?
Yeah, it's magnificent, yes.
Now, you mentioned the malleefowl. Shelley, perhaps you can tell us a little bit more about this quirky little, well, not little, big, chumpy sort of mound builder that we've got. What can you tell us about this beastie?
Yeah, so I do love the malleefowl as well. They're so cryptic, and you don't often see them for that reason. Very camouflaged. So when you do, it's a real treat. They're in the family of megapodes, which is only about 20 species of birds, and they've got this really interesting strategy where they, instead of using their body heat to incubate their eggs like every other bird, they make a mound. So they collect a bunch of leaves, and then with the moisture in the leaves, allow the leaves to rot, which then warms up the eggs. But with malleefowl, they're actually the only bird in this group that lives in an arid environment. So that makes it even more challenging because the leaves will dry out. So you can see here in this video, they make these massive mounds and then make a big hole in them, fill them with a bunch of leaf litter and sticks, and then they wait for the leaves, wait for the rainy season, basically, for the leaves to get really drenched with rain, and then they cover it up with a big layer of sand, and then eventually that kind of starts to break down and warm up, and that's what heats the eggs up. So these pretty incredible structures that you can see. They also, so they're quite a big bird. They're a bit bigger than a chicken, but the eggs are even bigger than that. They have the chicks that come out are quite developed, like for having been kind of born, I suppose, just having hatched. They have to then make their way out of this sand burrow, and then they're completely on their own. They don't have any parental support or anything. They just have to run off into the bush. So yeah, really, really interesting birds. They're listed as vulnerable nationally. They've had about 50% of their range reduced over the years, mostly due to habitat clearing. And of course, they also get impacted by feral predators like cats and foxes. And they're also quite sensitive to fire because they rely on long unburnt habitat to be able to collect all of that leaf litter for their mounds, so that can have a bit of an impact on them as well. But yeah, like Fiamma said, we see them here. We're expecting that they're going to be at Wanarra as well. So great opportunity to keep protecting.
But they're not the easiest things to find, those mounds, are they? I understand we sometimes have to fly drones or light aircraft across this dense bush and use LiDAR to actually find the mounds and then go and check them out and see whether they're active or not.
Yeah,
that's quite a process, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. We have the Malleefowl recovery group that come out to Charles Darwin and do surveys each year as well, so they kind of work out which ones are active and which ones aren't active. Yeah,
fantastic. Well, we certainly have a lot of animals and plants in this melting pot of life across the landscape. Let's move now, and perhaps Shelley, you can tell us a bit about what are the threats that impact the region? What are the things we've got to guard against that make up our, core management activities? And is it going to simply be a matter of doing more of that with Wanarra, or are there any special challenges ahead?
Yeah, so I suppose for the start, Charles Darwin is a great place to begin to understand what we might expect to see at Wanarra, since we know Charles Darwin so well, at least until we do those initial baseline surveys out at Wanarra. And I guess when you're dealing with land at such a large scale, a lot of the threats are similar, and as are the management actions, but they will vary and be a little bit more tailored depending on what you find at that finer scale. But yeah, feral predators, particularly cats and foxes, they're a big threat to many native species. Both cats and foxes, they've played a really significant role in mammal extinctions that we've seen across Australia, particularly for those mammals that are in the critical weight range. And we expect, that there would be a threat to species, particularly malleefowl, ground nesting birds, reptiles and frogs, and remnant small mammal populations as well. Then you've got fire as well. We touched on that a little bit with the malleefowl. You can see in that picture there, that's from a fire in 2000. There was another real big one in 1969 as well. And these fires burnt almost half of the property in Charles Darwin, and they would have also affected Wanarra as well. You can get some pretty high severity fires in this region. In certain vegetation types, for example, the Avon sand plains with the acacia is quite flammable. And although you do need fire for regeneration, it can also pose as a threat for some of these really slow growing species, and for species like the malleefowl and others that require that long unburnt habitat. So it's just about determining appropriate fire regimes for these landscapes, depending on the vegetation type.
Yeah, excellent. And what about weeds, Fiamma? Are they a problem?
Look, we don't want any. That's the and compared to spring. We got a handful of species. So Patterson's curse is one, double G is another one. So we're expecting that we'd see similar agricultural weeds at Wanarra, since we are on the edge of the agricultural zone. But because so much of the landscape is essentially intact, we anticipate that there won't have been huge niches available for incursions. We'll have to wait and see, as Shelley said, do some of those baseline surveys, but I have a feeling that similarly to CDR, there'll be very localised infestations, perhaps along tracks, around old water points, etc. And that we're mostly dealing with annual weeds, so we're not dealing with wood invasives or highly flammable perennial grasses such as buffel, which pose much more sort of an existential threat, in both in terms of control, the difficulty of control, and in terms of affecting things like fire regimes. So overall, cross fingers, I think we're going to be as lucky as we can be.
Fantastic. It's certainly driving through the landscape. It looks really intact compared to other parts of Australia. So that's a blessing, isn't it? Now, before we move on and look into the future of Wanarra and get to your questions, we've mentioned that Bush Heritage already has a strong partnership in place with the Badimia Bandibana Aboriginal Corporation, and we'll be looking to build a relationship with the Widi mob now, once we acquire Wanarra. And to find out a little bit more about that and the opportunities for continuing to build that relationship with First Nations connections, I was recently able to catch up with Shelley Strauss, who's our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Partnership Manager here in WA, and we had a bit of a chat, which we'll just run for you now as a video.
Hey, hi Shelley, how are you?
Hi, Matt, I'm good, thanks. How are you going?
Excellent, excellent. A little bit cold over the moment, but not too bad. Listen, I know this is the first time we've chatted, so it'd be great to know a little bit about you and where you're calling from today. Where do you call home?
Yeah, I'm based in Kalbarri in the Midwest of Western Australia. So that's on the traditional country of the Nunda people. I started with Bush Heritage in May 2025, so I've been with Bush Heritage just over 12 months now.
Tell us a bit about what you find most interesting working for Bush Heritage.
Look, I love working with the team of experts, which include the reserve managers, the ecologists, the healthy landscape managers, the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander engagement team, in addition to the elders who I work with on traditional country of the Yamaji people and the Noongar peoples in the southwest.
Let's look at who is involved on our existing CDR reserve, because that's the Badimia mob, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right. So in my role, I engaged through the Badimia Bandibana Aboriginal Corporation Board. So that's the appropriate pathway that we undertake to engage with elders and the board members.
So with the Badimia mob, when we got Charles Darwin, we did some healthy country planning, didn't we, with them right up front?
Yeah, that's right. So there was a memorandum of understanding and an agreement that involved that work of the healthy country planning. So since I've come on board, we've, I suppose, re-engaged with Badimia on different topics and opportunities that might come about in the future, which looks at that some of those management aspects of Charles Darwin Reserve.
And if we look more widely now, if we can acquire Wanarra, what opportunities does that open up for us in terms of relationships with the traditional custodians?
I think with the Widi mob and the Badimia people, there's opportunities to share knowledge and learn together, support ranger work across the property, capacity building, identify opportunities for training. And I suppose that all starts with those on-country visits, because being on country at Wanarra, I think just creates that environment for those open and honest conversations around aspirations of the traditional custodians, as sort of opposed to Bush Heritage kind of driving those activities, we're really keen to be guided by the Widi mob through their cultural committee, and the Badimia people through the Badimia Barna Aboriginal Corporation.
And it's always much more powerful to be sitting around having some billy tea and having a yarn, isn't it, on country when you're talking about, cultural issues.
It kind of, creates that environment for Widi mob elders and members and Badimia people, to initiate those conversations.
Yes.
Yeah, on the property.
Excellent. And I know one of the other things that's important that Bush Heritage is always keen to be led by the traditional custodians is the process of cultural mapping, isn't it? Whenever we take over management of a property, is understanding very early on what are the sacred places, what are the special places, and how do we look after them with the local mob?
Yeah, so sometimes these areas are sensitive in that there's certain rules around, who should be walking on them, or even kind of talking about the protection and managing of those sites. So I think, this is an area where we are eager to certainly be guided at the very beginning by Widi mob and Badimia people, so that this process of cultural mapping is undertaking at their pace, and it's done so respectfully.
Excellent. Well, I imagine you're getting excited about getting out there. Have you actually visited Wanarra yet yourself? I'm looking forward to it next week.
Yes, I have. And this time of the year is particularly nice because of the nice sunny days, clear skies, and there's I suppose not as many creepy crawlies and things around, but no, it's certainly a beautiful time of the year to visit.
Excellent. Well, listen, thank you so much for joining us today, and I look forward to catching up with you at some point when I'm passing through, hopefully in the next week if possible, or in the near future. So thanks, Shelley, for joining us today.
Thank you very much, Matt, and look forward to seeing you again soon.
Excellent.
Bye.
Cheerio.
Matt, you're on mute.
Thank you so much. I was just, it was the midges that were distracting us that I was talking about, because Cherie reckons there's no creepy crawlies. Well, there's certainly plenty of biting flies, isn't there, right now? So, which you probably can't see because they're so small. So that was a lovely chat with Cherie. And what I'd like to turn to now is really asking you what's going to be the major projects that we're going to have to get stuck into if we can acquire Wanarra. What's sort of the first things we need to do? And perhaps Shelley, you can answer that.
Yeah, sure. I suppose if we are successful in acquiring this property, there will be a lot of initial baseline work that will need to be done first, just to help inform how we can best manage Wanarra alongside Charles Darwin.
So like ecological monitoring, what's there?
Yeah, that'll be part of it. I mean, we'll be including a big inventory on the infrastructure as well, driving around the property, seeing what the boundary fences are like, the tracks, what the tracks are like, and the fire breaks. Also doing baseline vegetation surveys. We'd be working in with Badimia and Widi mob as well to get a better understanding of the cultural values and how best to protect those, which may involve cultural surveys as well. And once we have all of this information and form of the beginnings of a plan, we can then implement that plan with more of that on-ground works and monitor the success of what we're doing as well. And I guess our plans are so that would involve fire management, pest management, both feral herbivores and predators, potentially weed management, erosion. These are a lot of the things that we tend to focus on. And then, of course, we do monitoring as well to see how these work. And then it's a bit of an iterative process from there. So as we get the information back, then we can feed it back into our plans to continue to improve them.
Excellent. And I imagine there are other reserve and regional managers like yourself around the country going, yeah, but you've got a 13-year-old property with 13 years of no extensive pastoralism. So they're going to be a teensy bit jealous, I'd imagine, that you've got such a head start.
It definitely is great to be able to, take a property on and not have to kind of worry about those first few steps and just focus on some of the next kind of steps, like feral predators, for example, fire, that kind of thing will be, it'll save a huge amount of time.
Excellent. Well, let's get on to the nitty gritty then of what it's actually going to take to acquire Wanarra. We've had the opportunity because the neighbours made it available to us. So we've painted this picture, hopefully, for you of what an incredible landscape it is and what stunning contrasts there are in the different landforms. And, of course, the wonderful biodiversity that Fiamma and Shelley have talked about. Our target fundraising to buy the property is 4.6 million by the 30th of June, which is sort of imminent, which will allow us to protect this extraordinary property in a single unified area of 175,000 hectares, in combining it with Charles Darwin. And that will go to make up this puzzle piece of over 1 million, which is a much bigger figure and sounds great, including the other protected areas in the region. Where we've been really thrilled by the momentum so far. As is so often the case, Bush Heritage supporters are incredibly generous. For those of you who might watch our website, we've already raised just short of 2.5 million. There's a little slide up that shows what we've got to of that target of 4.6. So we're now into the final push of the campaign. And of course, what's wonderful is that some of our donors say, look, we'll match the giving. So any donations made up to 1.5 million will be doubled. So that number we've achieved at 2.5 includes the doubling. So there's a little bit more to go that will be matched. And I can see from the participants who are online today that we've already got some donors on with us today. So thank you. Thank you for continuing to support Bush Heritage. It's hugely appreciated by everybody in the organisation, not just Shelley and Fiamma, of course, who are going to be busy bears. It's such a great landscape, and the unique fauna and flora here really deserve, I think, that we can make this dream come true, this 13-year dream come true. So if you can make a donation on the website, please do. If you prefer to chat to one of the team, we would love to hear from you. So let's get on to some of the questions that we've had coming through. There's been a couple of questions about feral control, so let's explore that a little bit more. Ron Robertson came in early on before the webinar and pointed out that we're in a landscape where our neighbours, AWC, have a fence and there's protection behind the fence for their critters, but they're starting to soft release some of them, like the brush-tailed possums, which, believe it or not, for people in the eastern states, are not a pest out here. They are missing from the landscape and delightful addition to the marsupial fauna. And they've been soft-released and have turned up next door on Charles Darwin Reserve. So Ron's question was, what are we doing about the cats and foxes to make sure that these critters, whether they come from AWC next door, whether they come from other parts of the landscape, how are we managing that? So perhaps we can talk a little bit more. And I think we had a similar question from Linda, which was, what are the actual individual control measures being used? So perhaps, Shelley, we can ask you a bit about that.
Yeah, sure. So what we do on our existing properties in the Midwest, we've got an integrated pest management program. So across Charles Darwin, Urardi and Hamlin, and they're each a little bit different depending on their needs. But we start with reducing the rabbit numbers, because that'll of course affect the cats as well, and the foxes, but particularly the cats. So we we put out 1080 oats and Khaleesi virus for that, and brings down the rabbit numbers. And so we try and time it with the time of the year as well, when there'll be food and when there won't, to try and get the biggest impact out of that. And then from there, we'll target cats using baiting. We've got a monitoring program as well, a baiting and a non-baited area, so that we can compare and see the impacts of the baiting as well. So we put out Eradicate baits. We've also got Felixes, the technology with the camera which identifies the cat, and it sprays that gel with 1080 on it as well, and that'll give us a record of exactly which cats are being targeted. In this region, and quite a few different regions around the Midwest, there's groups also doing aerial baiting. And so you can get onto aerial baiting programs as well, which will be a lot more larger scale. So that's potentially something that we can look into for Charles Darwin and Wanarra as well.
Fantastic. And I guess that speaks also, I think implicit in Ron's question was, how does the cooperation work with the other landowners? Because it's a case that you have to work together to manage fire in the landscape and manage ferals. So that's how we do things out here.
Yes, absolutely. When we're very remote out here, and so you absolutely rely on your neighbours, and you have these great collaborations with them. So we've got Australian Wildlife Conservancy next door, but we've got other pastoral stations as well and things like that. And so we work together and collaborate when there's fires in the region, but also we're in regular contact with groups like AWC when it comes to how they're managing their pests, and what creatures they're releasing, and what we might find. And often we'll hop onto each other's properties and see what's going on. So definitely we work together.
And we hosted a fire forum, didn't we, recently, that involved all the local landowners?
Yeah, we did. So we hosted a fire forum all for the Goondiwal region here at Charles Darwin just a few weeks ago. Well, it was end of April. And so, we had a lot of different groups there. We had researchers, we had traditional custodians, ranger groups, government departments, and other conservation groups and things like that, all getting together to discuss fire.
Excellent.
It was really good. And
a question's just come in from Simon asking, how far away are we from the Mount Gibson property here? I mean, it's within sight, isn't it, basically, from where we're sitting here?
Yes, actually, you might have a better idea, Fiamma, how long it takes to drive, because I haven't gone out there yet, but it is very, I would say within half an hour probably.
Yeah, to drive to sort of their main hub, the sort of the homestead and research base area. Yeah, it's within half an hour. They are our immediate eastern neighbours.
Yes.
Yeah.
Excellent. There was another question from Shelley about climate change and its impact on flora and fauna, whether we're noticing that yet, or whether it's something we have to plan for the future. So, Fiamma, would you like to comment on at least the vegetation component of that?
Certainly. So no is the answer, is that we haven't started to notice anything that's specifically attributable to climate change on that boundary. And that is because that boundary is so prone to a swinging climate. So it's right on the edge of the winter rainfall zone and kind of the more erratic arid rangeland rainfall regime. And so you can imagine that some years, for example, cold fronts just don't make it that far inland, just because it's so on the edge of that system. And sometimes that more erratic, arid rangeland sort of weather pattern, for example, summer storms, make their way further down. So it's a really dynamic sort of part of the world, but all the climate modelling shows that area is particularly susceptible to climate change, in particular rising temperatures. However, having said that, the fact that we've got these coming together of regions will hopefully impart some resistance, some resilience to the system, as species are able to sort of like flow and move, and gene pools as well. And so we're hoping that this system will be able to adapt somewhat to climate change, particularly if we control all the factors that we can control, whether that is weeds, ferals, fire, etc. That the system has enough plasticity in it to be able to sort of like bounce back a little bit from climate change impacts.
Fantastic. That's a great description. Yes, if you remove the other stressors, then maybe climate change isn't quite as damaging on the critters.
Exactly.
Talking on the little critters, there's been a couple of questions. Simon asked, do we have any small marsupials on the reserve? And I'm sure we do have some small marsupials. And there was another question from the East Coast asking about numbats and bilbies. And I think numbats are confined to the far southwest, aren't they? And bilbies are more, although they once were found over vast areas of inland Australia. I don't think we've ever had bilbies here, have we? Do we have any expertise on that?
At Charles Darwin, we have recorded dunnarts and hopping mice, so we do have some small marsupials. But AWC Mount Gibson have released bilbies and numbats within their enclosure because they were historically found over a much larger area, including.
There you go.
Yes.
I'm from the East Coast. That's why I don't know about these things. Thank you.
No. So fingers crossed that eventually one day they, are able to be released and exist outside the fences as well.
Well, fantastic. Well, thanks for that question about the numbats and the bilbies, because that wasn't something I was aware of. So that's great news. There's a question about the baits, which I think is an important one to answer, and it's about how 1080 baits are used so that it doesn't affect birds of prey and native carnivorous marsupials. Shelley, perhaps you can talk to us a bit about the nature of 1080 and how it affects native versus non-native.
Yeah, so 1080 comes from a native plant, a native
pea plant,
from this region, and so there's a certain level of what's the word, the native species can handle it because it's kind of already they're used to it, they're evolved with it. So yeah, there's different levels depending on what the animal is. There's studies that show the different susceptibility levels for different species, but generally it's the non-native species that really get absolutely wiped out by it, and then the native species don't get affected by it as much. Yeah.
Excellent. Well, we mentioned birds of prey. There's a question from Jade, which is, what kinds of bird of prey are there on site? And I'm just peering at the screen because it's a bit vague. Do any of our bird populations migrate? Right, there's two big questions. I can certainly speak to the birds of prey I've seen while I've been here, and you guys can probably fill in because you spend much more time here. But I think kestrels and brown falcons, and I'm sure there will be eagles as well. What have you seen while you've been?
Yeah, you can get wedgies here.
Wedgies, yeah.
Whistling kites you often see. Yeah.
Yeah. Anything else from you, Fiamma? Do you lift your eyes from the vegetation too?
Those were the main ones I was going to say.
Yes.
But we can most definitely send any keen birders out there a bit more of a list via a written answer. We have 20 years worth of bird observations at Charles Darwin Reserve. So we definitely feel that we've got some comprehensive lists these days.
Yes.
For sure.
And I forgot to mention the black-shouldered kites, which I saw by the along the way, which, as some people probably know, are one of the only two birds that can properly hover. So you see them like kestrels by the side of the road sometimes. So that's another one that's seen.
Yeah.
Now about bird populations migrating. Yeah, sorry, go on.
I was going to say about bird population migrating, we're so lucky to have the Mungers Lake complex, because that is important for some migratory birds, particularly in sort of like nomadic, arid sort of rangeland birds, because when those lakes fill, not just Mungers Lake, but like more on the other side of Mount Gibson, they provide really important habitat for some of those birds. A very famous example would obviously be when Lake Eyre fills, you get these migrating populations. So obviously not on that scale, but these lake systems in the Midwest, when they do fill, they provide a really important resource for these migratory birds to be able to come in and reproduce, feed and reproduce, and then move on to the next best location when they dry up.
Yes, there's a lot of ducks that do that, don't they? I saw a
Yeah.
small flock of grey teal on Wongers Lake as I came through, and a very noisy party of Australian shelduck. And I don't know how much they move around, but I think they do. But they were having a right old Barney as I passed through there yesterday. So, and of course, there's all the passerine birds like the cuckoos that come down each year from Papua New Guinea and points north. Now, Ben, one of my colleagues, who's the bird expert of the region, has just flagged that there is, of course, one of the very special raptors, the black-breasted buzzard, that gets recorded from time to time and has even nested on the reserve. So that's quite a coup, because they're not a very common bird anywhere. So yeah, another one on the raptor list. Lynn has also asked about the cockatoos, the pink cockatoos and the red-tailed black cockatoo numbers. Any update, and Ben might chip in on the chat, but any update on numbers? Are we monitoring those? There's certainly lots of red-tailed blacks have flown over while I've been here. Parties of up to a 40, so I think they're probably doing quite well.
Yeah, Fiamma, you might be able to answer that better than I. I know that you definitely get both of them here, and we monitor them through our bird surveys. But in terms of what the numbers are and when they're most prevalent, I'm not sure.
I mean, certainly Charles Darwin, Wanarra, as I said, provide that habitat. You know, we've got those large remnant woodlands, large trees, which provide lots of habitat. We also have sort of good food sources for them. So locally, I imagine that they're doing well. However, large birds like red tails do move across the landscape quite a lot, and obviously we are on the edge of the wheatbelt region, which has been fragmented. So long-term population trends for sort of lots of these birds are great, but we're hoping that our monitoring shows that at least they've got a bit of a stronghold out in this sort of broader conservation estate of hopefully 1 million hectares. So yes, sorry, not a very direct answer, but it's a little bit hard to untangle monitoring data for specific species from the broader environmental context. But certainly we're doing our best to maintain them by maintaining sort of large swathes of habitat for them.
And they move around a lot, don't they? So they're big birds that spend a lot of time.
Red tails, they're big birds that move around a lot. So the bigger the landscape that we can conserve for them, the better.
They certainly fill the sky with their calls, and it's beautiful when they go over. So great pleasure. Another question's come up, or a couple of people have mentioned dingoes. Do we have dingoes out here?
Yes, we do.
We do have them. They're in the landscape. Yeah.
Yeah.
And do we see them very often? Are they in particular numbers? Are they helping with controlling cats and foxes, do you think?
Yeah, they tend to go for the kittens and things like that. So they do have a positive impact on some of those predators.
Yes.
In terms of the numbers, it's another one we'd have to unpack and probably give you a more detailed answer with something specific from Charles Darwin. But definitely we get them out here.
That's time, yes. And there's a question from Mike. Are we planning on putting up any fencing? No doubt, I presume that's to do with the new reserve and whether we need to fence that. We like to pull fences down rather than put them up, don't we, generally? But what's the plan once we acquire?
Generally, where we don't need fences, it's great to remove them to allow that flow of animals through the landscape, and also that animals don't get harmed from fencing. But if there's a risk of herbivores, like feral herbivores and stock like that from neighbouring properties coming through, then we will reinforce those fences.
Yes.
We don't think that feral goats and sheep or stock from elsewhere will be a huge problem because we have so many other nature reserves surrounding Wanarra and Charles Darwin.
Yes.
There may only be a few potential incursion points.
Yeah.
And then of course on the western side of the lake we've got all agricultural, smaller parcels of agricultural land.
Yeah.
But yeah, I guess it'll just depend on once we've done a bit of our own surveys and sussing out what's out there, see if there's any repairs for fencing that's required around the boundary. But yeah, certainly between the two properties and also within Wanarra,
Yes.
yeah, we won't be probably putting any more fences up.
Excellent. Well, I think we're coming close to time now. So if there are any other questions still coming through, and I think there may be, we will of course do as we always do and get in touch with you by email to see if we can answer those queries. Thanks everybody for joining us today. Just a reminder that this bush broadcast will be available on from our website this afternoon, and indeed all past bush broadcast webinars are available that you can access any time. So feel free to share those with friends or influencers or people that you think might wish to join the passion and help us acquire Wanarra. Please do feel free to pass on those links. And if anything today has inspired you, even more than I know you normally are, to get behind this acquisition, then you will be very much appreciated. Thanks, Fiamma, for joining us today. Thanks, Shelley, for joining me out here on the wonderful reserve where the sun has come out for the first time since I landed in WA 2 days ago. So it's really quite a pleasure. It's surprising how much rain you're getting in the landscape, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
Now, tell me, does that mean the wildflowers this year are going to be even better? Because winter rain is a bit of a predictor, isn't it?
I reckon they're going to be pretty good this year. What do you reckon, Fiamma?
Oh, fingers crossed the rain keeps falling.
Excellent. So you want more rain?
More rain. Let's do more rain, more flowers. Yeah.
Yeah, excellent. All right. Well, listen, thank you for joining us. Thanks to our incredible supporters. Thanks for all of you who volunteer your time and your skills out on reserve to help us do this vital conservation work and achieve the wonderful additions to our reserve network that we're aiming for. If you do have a couple of final minutes, please stick around for the closing video where we'll feature some pictures and imagery of Wanarra. Goodbye from me, and thanks very much, Shelley and Fiamma. See you next time.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye.